Streaming live, this is Tracking the Tropics.
We continue to follow Hurricane Dorian along this track here as it approaches the southeastern United States. The 8 o'clock advisory from the National Hurricane Center is in. Hurricane Dorian remaining a dangerous Category 4 hurricane, nearing Category 5 status, inching closer to the max status for a major hurricane. We are live here on Tracking the Tropics with our team to break down exactly what this means for the southeastern United States. Hey there, everybody. WFLA digital anchor JB Buno back with you here live on stream. On the right side of your screen, it's Chief Meteorologist Steve Jervey here with Storm Team 8 at WFLA in Tampa Bay. And then in the bottom right-hand portion of your screen, WIAT's CBS 42's Sarah Canty, meteorologist there in central Alabama, who's joining us. Guys, the 8 o'clock advisory is down. Steve, we're going to start with you. What does this mean for the future of Hurricane Dorian?
Well, this is a position update that they'll do when they actually have watches or warnings along the East Coast or in the contiguous U.S. And when they have that, and they have that in place from Deerfield Beach up to Sebastian Inlet now for the East Coast and east of Florida. So the position update basically saying it's 335 miles directly east of West Palm Beach. Now that's actually north of a 26th parallel there, which is basically directly east of Miami. So it's actually north of Miami at this point. Right now it's on a westerly track, moving fairly slow at 8 miles per hour, but it is forecast to become more of a northwesterly track over the coming days, and there will be slow movement over the coming days. It's amazing when you look at that forecast track to see how slowly everything is moving. It's also amazing to look at see how well formed this hurricane is. 150 miles per hour is very close to Category 5 status. It's a very well organized storm. It's low wind shear. It's warm sea surface temperatures. It's in a very favorable area for strengthening. So we might still see possibility of a Category 5 hurricane. When storms reach this kind of intensity, they do tend to wobble in strength sometimes, whether there be some upwelling from colder air, especially if they're moving slowly, but also we'll see these eye wall replacement cycles too. They can kind of weaken them temporarily, but no doubt that there's no reason to think for the next several days we aren't going to be dealing with at least a Category 4 hurricane, potentially a little bit stronger than that.
Days here. So the northern Bahamas, this is a very dangerous hurricane. I know we've kind of slacked off a little bit and really giving not the all clear to the west coast of Florida by any means, but we're definitely breathing a little bit of a sigh of relief for much of the Florida peninsula, but that is not the case for the Bahamas. This is a very dangerous Category 4, potentially Category 5 hurricane. We're 6 miles per hour away from this being a Category 5 hurricane. So this could be very devastating for the island with this slow movement and then that northward track. So it's really important to also mention that this could be a big issue for the Carolinas. While we are fairly confident right now that this storm will hug the coast and stay offshore, since the Carolina track is already, let's say, 4 days out, that could change. A subtle change of even 50 miles could mean big changes for the forecast for the Carolinas, which could have a big impact there.
Steve, what does this mean for the coastal communities of not just Florida, but also for Georgia, potentially South Carolina and North Carolina? Maybe you guys could both kind of weigh in here as to the areas that are going to be impacted and maybe seeing potentially storm surge as a result of Hurricane Dorian Monday, Tuesday, more, I would imagine, into Wednesday as well for some of those more northern states.
Yeah, a lot of we've been watching the past couple of days, and perhaps folks have seen the forecast pass. They've seen the computer models. They've seen the official track shift east, and the cone as well is mostly out of the Tampa Bay area, but does include a good portion still, the cone, of the east coast of Florida. And we're by no means out of the woods yet. I'm not trying to down or upplay this. This is a serious storm, a very dangerous hurricane. It's relatively compact, but it's still extremely dangerous. And we all know how unpredictable the tracks of tropical systems can be. So this is very good thinking. The computer model consensus gets a little bit better as we get closer to a potential landfall, a shorter period of time. But this is a slow-moving storm. And as the storm continues to move very slowly, the rest of the atmosphere all over the planet is constantly in motion. So those things change as well, hour by hour. The way the computer models have a handle on them now is the weaker ridge of high pressure the weakness will be there. And there's also an upper level trough roughly across the Great Lakes in that area that could play a part in helping to move the storm north. For coastal residents, especially on the east coast of Florida, they definitely need to watch for the effects. Any wobble, in fact, the GFS had suggested perhaps a little bit more of a westerly track again, means that it could be a lot of damage along Florida's east coast. We saw this several years ago with Matthew, and we definitely could see something like that again if it became a little bit closer to coastal areas, anywhere really from, say, West Palm Beach northward, especially as the storm would wobble farther back to the west. That could cause extremely high seas, some amount of storm surge, and just a pounding of a slow-moving hurricane over a period of time, and additional rainfall too close to the coast. Would you bring in a lot of rain, just dragging moisture off the Atlantic, turning it into rain, and just dumping it along coastal spots? In the right spot, you could get 15 to 20 inches of rain over a period of time, and that causes flooding of all sorts. So as we get up into the Georgia and the Carolinas, the better news for them today is the trend for the computer models for the current period of time. It doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. Has lifted the center of the National Hurricane Center track off of the coast of those areas. Very much still in the cone, very much in an area of concern for sure. So if you are in those areas, to make sure to watch those closely, because the center of the storm might look like it's going to go offshore, but it's going to be razor thin close along the coastal areas, especially if it should clear the Florida Peninsula. Georgia, North and South Carolina coastlines need to watch that closely. We're by no means out of the woods on this one yet. It's a nice day out maybe where you are, but this is an extremely dangerous hurricane sitting just off Florida's east coast, 335 miles to the east of West Palm.
Yeah, and something we're going to have to be watching throughout the really next 24 to 48 hours to see how this interacts with the Bahamas. Obviously, it's thin islands. It's not going to do all that much to weaken this storm, but whenever we see the eye wall interact with land, we may see some weakening there. But when we're talking about a Category 4, a high-end Category 4 hurricane, it is going to still be able to keep its act together as it starts to track towards the coastline. And even over the next really 24 hours here, this is getting into deeper, warmer water. So very likely we could have a Category 5 on our hands here shortly. Still maintaining the 150 mile per hour wind speeds, but this is in a favorable environment.
Everybody, we have been periodically checking in over the course of the day with 8 on your sides. Jeff Patterson, one of our very seasoned reporters as far as hurricanes go, covered many hurricanes over many, many years. And I believe that Jeff is standing by now, ready to go with a live report here. I'm not exactly sure where Jeff is joining us from because he keeps changing his location over the course of the day. But there is 8 on your sides, Jeff Patterson. Hey there, Jeff. Where are you? And what are you seeing out there? What is going on?
Good evening, JB. We're actually on the Halifax River. This is the Halifax Marina behind me. We're in Daytona Beach. Started out our day in West Palm. We were in Cocoa Beach the day before that. We drove north on 95 to get to here, and we may end up heading further north from here. I ran into a very interesting story here, though, at the Halifax Marina that will be bringing people later tonight on Channel 8 at 11 p.m. There's a former airline pilot and his wife that live on a very nice boat back there. He's a man who's now a college professor. He's been keeping a very close eye on this storm. He's monitored weather his entire life for his career, so this is something he's fascinated by and interested in, of course, because of where he lives. They have spent the entire day lashing down their boat, making sure that all of their possessions are secure, because as he told me, that's his home. That's where he lives. He has to protect that. At the same time, he's made arrangements to have hotels in a couple of different places depending on the storm path that he can evacuate to. As soon as they get done preparing their boat, they plan to do that. I've been hearing you talk about the cone, the projected path, and we went to a Home Depot today where people were still picking up supplies. Steve Jervy just said, we don't want to upsell this hurricane. We don't want to make it sound more dangerous than it is. At the same time, you have to caution people about these hurricanes. They're incredibly unpredictable because of the nature of the storms and all of the factors that are coming in. Can't just fixate on that one central line. You have to look at the cone in its entirety. That said, that's what we've been doing. We're kind of monitoring the progress of the storm to see the constant updates from the Hurricane Center about where the projected path of this hurricane is. And so we're kind of monitoring that along with Steve. That said, I wanted to let Steve know that I have a brand new anemometer, a handheld wind meter, because my old one gave out. I've covered so many hurricanes with it, I had to buy a new one. So looking forward to perhaps, kind of monitoring the progress of this storm and letting people know exactly what's going on as it occurs. But so far, as we have been covering this event, because of the fickle nature of Dorian, haven't gotten a single afternoon thunderstorm basically on top of us, haven't brought out the handheld wind meter yet, but we're still preparing as if, we're ready to do this, because as Steve just mentioned, it's a powerful Category 4 hurricane, potentially a Category 5. And as Steve knows from his incredible experience, Hurricane Andrew was supposed to turn and didn't. Hurricane Charlie wasn't supposed to turn where it did, and it did. So as much data is coming in from those NOAA hurricane hunters and the Air Force hurricane hunters, real-time data that is going into these computer models, it's still, with all of the science and all the computer technology and all of the algorithms that they have going into these models, it's still very difficult to predict exactly where the storm is going and the power with which it will make landfall, let alone the storm surge. We're at a king tide right now, and so the potential for storm surge all along the Atlantic coast, where the tide is higher than normal because of the moon, we have the potential for a lot of danger. That's why we want to keep people updated. That's why we want to keep people informed about where this storm is going. And so we're going to do the best we can throughout the course of the next few days to do that.
Yeah, Jeff, you're very much in the cone in Daytona Beach and cone of air at the moment. This is a slow-moving storm. We would say we're going to be talking about this for days. As I look at the position, roughly 2 p.m. Tuesday off of Cocoa Beach. So, in this current forecast scenario, you're probably talking later Tuesday for impacts along the Volusia County line. You're up in Daytona Beach right now, and it's still a long way away. This is a very long story. It's like a marathon reporting on this thing, waiting to see where it could be, whether it wobbles back to the west or potentially wobbles farther off to the east. All that will change, and there'll be little changes. And then you made a great point about those hurricane models. No model is perfect. This is just guidance. We try to look at a consensus, but in the end, the atmosphere, Mother Nature always wins out with these forecast tracks and these computer models. And you and I have both been covering storms for well over 30 years. We both know that that can change in an instant. I lived through it with Andrew in 1992. It was supposed to go into about where you are, into the Space Coast or up into Volusia County, and then it took a hard west and southwest turn. I'm not saying it's going to happen with this storm, but that's why I'm just trying to remind people the changeability of the forecast track and the computer models and the trends. So because this is a long period of time, over the next couple of days, as I mentioned, possibly later Tuesday into Wednesday, people really need to stay tuned. And I hope the folks on the Volusia County coastline, all interest, are taking this seriously and know that just because the forecast track is where it is right now, they're not relaxing, because they're definitely very much not out of danger.
We have seen people boarding up still, Steve, and today at Home Depot buying supplies. At the same time, the level of anxiety, even where I am, has dropped, because people think they're in the clear. And we want to let them know that although the consensus of the models is it's taking it off the coast and further away from here, you still need to keep an eye on it. Still need to see if there's that potential that it doesn't make that predicted turn. And if it comes barreling into the coast of Florida, it could be a catastrophic event. Again, we don't want to, stand out here and cry wolf. At the same time, you have to let people know, keep an eye on this thing. Don't relax your guard at this time. I've seen some hilarious memes, frankly, from all of my friends who have been kind enough to update me constantly on these things. They're saying, it's supposed to be a Labor Day storm. It may be a Memorial Day storm at this rate.
Yeah, that's the nature of these storms, and you've done a great job of telling us what's going on out there, and just keep us posted, because this is going to be an evolving situation, and should that the storm come closer to the coastal areas, please be safe and get away from that water, because it could be a significant storm surge closer to the coastal areas depending on the track, as well as the rainfall because of the speed of the storm.
All right, everybody, 8 on your sides. Jeff Patterson joining us live from Daytona Beach. Hey Jeff, safe travels out there, and thanks a lot for checking in. All right, continuing the conversation here, everybody, with, again, WFLA Chief Meteorologist Steve Jervey, and then joining us all the way from WIAT CBS 42 in Birmingham, Alabama, it's Sarah Canty. And Sarah, I think we're going to be beginning the interactive Q&A portion of our live stream here, where we're going to be taking questions from from people on Facebook, and I'm going to be typing that into the comment section here momentarily. But Sarah, what's kind of the chatter in Alabama these days surrounding Hurricane Dorian? Is there a lot of people out there in central Alabama interested in the storm and have been following it?
Awareness just given less than a year ago. We had Michael impact central Alabama, even farther down into South Alabama as well. So definitely a lot of awareness with this storm. Thankfully, we are not expecting any sort of impact in Alabama from this storm, just because we will have a ridge of high pressure over us throughout the week that'll help to block Dorian from making that continued westward track. So we're very confident that the impacts felt here locally are just about nothing. But Alabama's no stranger to tropical systems. So every time we have that potential there, our viewing audience is very interested and wants to know the latest updates. Also, just worth mentioning, National Hurricane Center does have an area of interest that we are going to be watching over the next several days that is in the Gulf. But rest assured, for folks along the Gulf Coast, it does look like that system with a low-end chance of development will likely just impact Mexico. So good news there that things in the Gulf, at least for the short term, will be fairly quiet. But we're right into peak hurricane season, usually peak second week of September. So we're definitely in the thick of it.
All right, and we're getting some questions here that are already coming in. The first one is coming in from Dan in the comment section, and we're going to try to answer these questions, Sarah, as quickly as we can so that we can get to as many questions as possible, of course, as you know. So Dan is asking in the comment section, hashtag, hey, Sarah, what are the chances of a sudden westerly course shift overnight when everyone is asleep? Is there any chance that the models could shift a little bit more? We've had the model shifting a little bit, inching closer more and more east. Could it bounce back west even just the slightest bit in the hours or in the day ahead?
Well, definitely we could see a subtle shift. With a hurricane can always wobble, and we could see a subtle shift. But with the slow motion of this storm, this is not something that's going to sneak up on us. This is only moving at around 8 miles per hour and likely going to slow down from there. So if we do see changes in the track, we will know well in advance. At least it's not going to sneak up on us overnight. But for folks who are in the cone of uncertainty, you need to be having a way to update you, and you need to be checking back here to get those updates. And don't go to bed, say, at 8 o'clock at night and not have a way to alert you until later next morning, because obviously things can change.
Yeah, I want to bring in Chief Meteorologist Steve Jervey here. And Steve, the question coming in from Mandy. This is kind of giving you a softball question here, softball toss question. You ready? Mandy says, hashtag, hey, Steve, if the storm continues on this track, what can the west coast of Florida, particularly Sarasota, expect to experience? And I would imagine not too much, but what would the weather be like on the west coast of Florida if the trajectory holds at this particular path?
On the current path, and speaking directly, because we know this can change, you see how large the cone of error is. Currently, Sarasota is out of that cone of error. In fact, the next couple of days, we'll probably see classic summer weather with afternoon thunderstorms developing, warm, humid conditions as we expect this time of year. As we get later in the week, however, if the storm would continue on this path on the current track, we would see winds coming out of the northwest. On the backside of the storm with drier air aloft, it would probably keep our rain situation much, much quieter, perhaps 20% or less for the area, meaning very hot and sunny weather for the area. So with these storms, when they're this close, there's an area of subsidence or sinking air around the outside of these storms, and they can really provide tranquil and calm weather. Believe it, just the antithesis of what a hurricane is, but on the outside, that's what you have. So we'll likely would be in that zone on this current path. So you probably wouldn't see a significant change other than to perhaps see lower thunderstorm chances and maybe just an overall breezy day when the storm could potentially be off the east coast of the Space Coast.
WFLA top Facebook fan Shelly is commenting and says, hashtag, hey, Steve. She wants to know about, discussing the 8 o'clock update. She wants to know if there was anything, Steve, in that 8 o'clock update that was particularly interesting to you, particularly 8 o'clock here.
I was most interested to see, because it is kind of on the cusp of a Category 5 storm. They've been measuring the storm with a Hurricane Hunter aircraft throughout the day, whether or not they would, because the storm is so well formed, as you can clearly see on the satellite, if they would upgrade it to a Category 5. That's not impossible by any means over the next 48 hours because of the good conditions the storm will be in. So, no, I didn't see anything there that really surprised me. I expected a slow forward speed, but to maintain it at 150 miles miles per hour. Whether it's 156 or 150 doesn't really matter at this point. You just have to know it's an extremely dangerous hurricane. It's still off the coast of Florida, will be for days, and it still is a threat, especially to the east coast of Florida, but that can change. So it's easy to kind of want to write it off and change the channel and not follow it anymore. But please stay aware of it, just because it's still within certainly in our neighborhood.
All right, we have a question coming in here from Kristen. We're going to take one or two more here on Facebook Live, everybody. This one coming in from Kristen Barrett. She says, hashtag Hey Sarah. And actually, I want to get both of your perspectives on this, but she says, hashtag Hey Sarah. Is there any high or low dry air or air pressures out there that you're watching that may affect Dorian's course? What do you say to Kristen there?
Of course, that is fully going to impact the track of Dorian. We have a ridge of high pressure over the western Atlantic that we're expecting to shift slightly eastward. That's going to help slow Dorian's track and also cause Dorian to start to curve up to the northeast due to a trough that's going to be moving through from the west. So the interaction of the trough and the ridge, that is going to fully impact Dorian's motion. And these are large scale weather patterns that we're talking about, but they have very large implications and a subtle shift that could really impact this system. So that's what we'll be tracking. We also have a ridge that'll be over the southeast, more closer towards Alabama and Mississippi, that'll help to block this storm from getting into the Gulf. So definitely that kind of complicated to explain it all, but that's the gist of it.
All right, we're getting a couple of questions here about this turn that is projected to happen. You guys, again, we've been talking about this many times here on Tracking the Tropics, talking about the turn that this is going to be projected to take, but a lot of also questions about the speed of this storm. Steve, that model I think that we just saw there on that graphic, it said 8 miles per hour. Mm-hmm. That's pretty slow as far as hurricanes go, right? At this particular juncture, as far as how fast this storm is moving from east to west? I would, in my opinion, be at the low end of the normal scale for sure. But the storm has moved previous to this along pretty good clip, 13, 14 miles per hour, but now it is slowed. And steering currencies, if you want to say rivers of air, I used to heard that it explained that way. Rivers of air at the high levels of the atmosphere, 50, 60, 40,000 feet within that range, that actually steer these storms that are obviously on the surface of the earth. So that's what we have, is a steering currents moving the storm at a certain rate. When those steering currents are stronger, it'll move a little quicker. When they're weaker, perhaps a little bit slower. So as we mentioned with the ridge of high pressure in the Atlantic, the western side of that ridge, the forecast to provide a weakness there for the storm to move to the north. And then that other player that kind of came in, a trough that's not that deep across the eastern part of the country, that is sort of emerged to play a part as well in helping to move the storm to the north. And when I was looking at the European computer model earlier this afternoon, the storm went west and then kind of stopped and then just took a northerly turn. And I've seen all of that in my years of doing tropical weather. It's just rather odd to see a computer model do it, but it's just reacting to the changes in the atmosphere. Remember, the slow speed of Dorian, I think, has really contributed to the path that we're seeing and the easterly trend of it. The longer it's out there, the more the Earth's atmosphere continues to move and change. And as it does, the changes fit in with tracking the storm of this very large area of low pressure. So that's how it's evolved into the track that it has over the past couple of days, that more eastward bias. Everybody, we are here live on Tracking the Tropics with every advisory that comes down from the National Hurricane Center. We are live here with the 8 o'clock advisory that just came down minutes ago, and not too much change as far as the 8 o'clock advisory goes. We're going to be back here live at 11 o'clock with the final advisory for this Saturday, the final actual advisory for the month of August, everybody. The calendar turns over to Sunday, September 1st, rather, beginning tomorrow, of course. So before we head out, just some final thoughts here. I want to give the floor over to WIAT CBS 42 meteorologist Sarah Canty. Sarah, your final thoughts here on Hurricane Dorian as we brace for the days ahead.
I know a lot of people out there are seeing the track eastward and thinking, oh, this is not a big deal. That is the exact opposite of what you should be thinking, because the storm could very well hug the coast, possibly even move slightly more west. So we're going to have to watch it over the coming days, because a subtle shift could have drastic impacts with this storm. And when you're talking about a Category 4, high-end Category 4 at that, this is nothing to take lightly and not something to write off right now.
All right, now we go over to Storm Team 8 meteorologist Steve Jervey. Steve, your final thoughts on Hurricane Dorian for the month of August.
Well said, Sarah, by the way, and thank you for joining us from Birmingham tonight. I couldn't agree more. This is an extremely dangerous storm. It's pretty rare to see a storm in this position and then to have it stay there for a number of days, and we'll be doing that and watching it and watching the changes and watching the path extremely closely. You just have to know that most of the Tampa Bay area is now out of the cone of air, but that can change and that can shift over time, and we have plenty of time to do that. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday period of time. The next 3 days we're going to be watching this storm because of its slow movement. So just keep your preps in place, especially inland counties, Lakeland, in Polk County, Highlands County, Hardee, DeSoto County, especially because of the position of where the storm is. We're not out of the woods. Again, we're not trying to create any panic. We're just trying to inform you that this is a possibility. That doesn't mean where the track is now. That can certainly change. And look at that cone. Look at that cone. Look at that cone. That is the most important thing to focus on. I know it's tempting to look at the center of the cone and the track, but it's the cone of air, the cone of uncertainty, the window of possible movement, all those things I've called it through the years. It's especially important in this storm in the coming days, and watch for the changes and the trends, and just stay tuned. We'll keep you up to date.
There were a lot of comments, too, in the comments section appreciating the expertise on the ground from 8 on Your Side's Jeff Patterson, who keeps moving along the Florida coast. So I also want to thank Jeff Patterson for joining us here live on Tracking the Tropics. Again, follow Jeff more. He's going to have an excellent story tonight. I've already seen a little bit of it here in the newsroom. A great story tonight for our viewers here on WFLA News Channel 8 in Tampa Bay, your NBC station, in our 11 o'clock newscast, where, of course, you will also see Chief Meteorologist Steve Jervey with the latest on the 11 o'clock advisory when it comes down a couple of hours from now. And we'll be back here live on Tracking the Tropics with that 11 o'clock advisory when it does come down from the National Hurricane Center. So for Jeff Patterson, Chief Meteorologist Steve Jervey, Meteorologist Sarah Canty over there in Alabama, thank you again, Sarah. I am WFLA digital anchor JB Buno. Thanks for being with us here on this edition of Tracking the Tropics. We'll see you in about 2.5 hours from now for the 11 o'clock advisory. Thank you for being with us.